Today we'll be covering the second round of what I consider to be one of the worst performing tournaments I had in a few years. Let's get into things. I'm playing with the white pieces, and I am playing against Mahip here, and I play the move e4. So, just normal repertoire stuff here, nothing unusual. I didn't see a reason to change things up. I also did win my last round, so I was feeling pretty good going into this one. We see e5, and I continue with knight f3 and bishop to b5. And then my opponent plays the Berlin. Now, there's a couple options here. You can castle, which allows knight takes e4, which tends to lead to a bit of a kind of dry situation here. Or you could play d3 and really just play things out a bit slower, but generally there's a pretty interesting game. Instead, I decided to castle here. So first off, after knight takes on e4, there's a couple options. First off, there's rook to e1, and after knight to d6, you can take on e5, or you can play maybe bishop takes on c6 here. I think knight takes e5 is obviously like the move to play. And then, things can continue from here. You can't take this bishop, first off, because knight takes c6 wins the queen. So bishop to e7 is played, and knight takes on e5 is played. Actually, that's where I was thinking of what the potential moves were there for the opponent. Actually, funnily enough, I think after knight d6, d4 is what I was maybe thinking. No. It couldn't have been. It was definitely knight takes on e5, and then this position. After bishop to e7, you can play something like bishop to f1, and then you go like d4, and of course if they take first and play bishop to e7, bishop to f1 here, they kind of transpose. White gets like a decent position, but generally black is doing quite okay here, and you don't need like a ton of theory as black to kind of hold the quality, it feels like, unless there's like, some trick lines you go for. For example, after bishop f6, there's this interesting line, I believe, with bishop to d3, which turns out to be equal. The engine might say it's slightly preferred for black, as you can see on the side here, but trust me, this does go down an equal line at the end of the day. So, after knight takes e4, though, I played d4, and this is the notorious Berlin endgame. After knight to d6, I still have an opportunity to go for one of those Berlin draws with d takes e5, knight takes b5, where after a4, knight bd4, you take it, and then you play d5, I believe, is the move, and then you take here, knight takes d4, don't throw in this check because of knight e6, instead you take, where after bishop takes, we're after queen takes. This is the move, not bishop takes. Bishop takes loses to queen g7, and then queen e4, queen d4. I didn't do that, obviously. I wanted to try to play for more. I took on c6, took on e5, took on d8, and this is the start of the Berlin. Now, there's a couple moves here that are playable. Very common is h3, if I actually check what the most common moves are. Knight c3 is first, h3 is next, rook to d1 is quite popular. b3 is kind of an interesting move. I remember playing bishop to f4 a little bit back in the day. I remember seeing that, I think, from Karpov once. It's barely been played. It's not really such a great move so early, but there's a lot of decisions that white can make here. Again, I mentioned things like, b3, h3, knight c3. And the thing is, a lot of these moves eventually get played, but they kind of get played in different scenarios here. Generally, what's considered to be best is something like knight to c3 first or h3 first. And these moves are really just aimed to be flexible. Black's best plan, as of late, tends to be something involving some sort of king e8, bishop to e7, and if they can trade a pair of rooks off the board, just one pair, then a lot of the initiative that white tends to have in this position kind of just goes away. So it's really all dependent on that, and of course, with best play, that usually happens. So let's kind of get into things here. I played knight to c3, And then we see king to e8, which, yeah, has that idea of usually something like bishop e7, bishop e6, and some sort of like rook d8, trying to get that rook to d8 pretty quick. I played h3, again, just kind of a normal move. This does somewhat threaten g4, not immediately though. I think it's not really such a great move. Like if a5, g4 is a bit early, because then black can actually start playing with moves like h5. And yeah, I might have to play king to g2 here, but after h5, I don't want to take, but also like, what do I do if I play king g3? Like, maybe this is working out, but you have to be very careful here. That first off, you're never able to go for f4, f5. For example, here, if you play h5 and g5, this is just really bad for white all of a sudden, because black has the bishop pair and they have good places to put their pieces. But more importantly, you're also just never getting f4, f5, and either e6 or g6 in. So, yeah, h5 was played. I played bishop to f4. Now, the reason behind bishop to f4, there is a good reason to play a move like this. And to me, after h5, it felt like bishop to f4 made a lot more sense. And that is that after this move, first off, of course, defending the pawn is nice, but it looks a little strange because you're also putting it in a place where it's not really doing anything that obvious. But e6 actually could be a good idea. For example, when the king goes to e8, it's no longer defending c7. So if they play a slower move like a6, you can always consider something like e6, bishop takes, and then bishop takes on c7. Sometimes this is useful, sometimes it's really not. Here, obviously, this is a little too early for it. But that's kind of the idea. After bishop to e6 was played, knight g5 is probably best right away. It was pretty early to bring the bishop here. Rook h6, you can take on e6 here, play something like rook to d1, and yeah, I mean, feels like rook to d8 makes the most sense, but this also just feels like it gives white a pretty decent position. Moves like knight c5 could come at some point if black's not careful. Knight g5 is a little bit of a threat too. There's a little bit of activity, generally doesn't really mean too much, but this is kind of like, it's a playable position, and we're not grandmasters, so anything can happen here. But yeah, I didn't play knight g5. I played rook f to d1, and I think this is actually the wrong rook. So the better rook here is rook a to d1, and it might seem a little obvious that rook a to d1 might be the better choice, because, well, I mean, this rook could still go to e1, but it actually doesn't really have too much to do with that. When I played rook to d1, my idea here was that sometimes a4, a5, and even a6 could come. For example, there was a game, I believe, Sam Sevian played. It was in the St. Louis Summer Classic, where he played this a4 and a5 at some point, and it was incredibly strong because eventually the pawn got to a6, and that was when the king was on c8, though. That's kind of the big difference here. And why it's not as effective. But when the pawn got to a6, I believe his opponent played b6, and they were just under a ton of kingside pressure. So I heavily recommend looking at that game. I think it's a pretty instructive one for why king c8 can sometimes land into trouble early on. So yeah, my opponent played bishop to e7 here, and then I played knight g5 finally. Actually, before we even cover that, the reason I was a little worried about rook to d1, I believe, was bishop c4 stuff. But this is just not a good move, because after rook to e1, it's kind of encouraging moves like e6 now, because now the rook's on the file as well. You can imagine something like knight g5 coming. And the reason I was a little worried here was because of bishop to b4. But it turns out this move just doesn't really work. I believe an old game I had where a move like bishop to b4 came, I played something like this, and it actually worked out in that one. They didn't even take. They went bishop a5 to b6. That was against Mark, and that was when I was like 1300, though. That was many, many years ago. But here, one of the ideas is actually rook to e4. And if bishop c3 comes, you can just take on c4. If bishop to b2, you can play rook b4, the bishop has to move, you take on b7, and white is just winning here because look at their activity. They have the d file, they have their rook on the 7th rank, their pawns are split, and even though ours are as well, c2 and a2 are harder to attack than c7 and a7, which are currently being attacked. And yeah, if something like rook c8 comes, at least we could take on a7, though engine gives e6 with a massive advantage. So yeah, it turns out that's just not a threat. But also something important to mention is why not b5? Well, actually it turns out knight takes b5 works. Where after c takes, there's b3, and we can take on b4. And there's not really a way to exploit this for black. Yeah, lots of crazy lines, but that's kind of relevant here because something like bishop b4 and taking feels like it's not even such a bad idea. But here it doesn't really work for that reason. So rook f to d1, a little bit less accurate. Bishop to e7 here. And yeah, knight g5, just going for the bishop. Again, if the bishop ever moves, then eventually there's e6. It also encourages knight f7 here, which would be winning for white, thanks to king f7 and rook d7. This just wins a pawn, and in these types of positions, a pawn is generally enough, especially when it's a 4 versus 2, and their queenside majority is damaged, meaning that it's going to be harder for them to create a passed pawn, which is, again, one of the advantages in the Berlin. 10-hour Berlin endgame video coming soon? Maybe. Maybe I will. Anyways, yeah, so rook to h6 now was played. And I should have just taken on e6. There's not really a reason not to. I spent quite a bit of time here, 13 minutes on g3. Now, I could have imagined a future where after I take, and then they take with the rook, where they want to play h4. Like, if I play g3 here, they have g5, just winning the pawn. So I couldn't really play g3 earlier. So I wanted to play like g3 and h4 because they have, well, the dark square bishop. So it's not like they're using the g4 square. But g3 is kind of inappropriate at the moment. Knight takes e6 just makes the most sense. And here, even though I don't get g3, this is definitely a weakness of mine. Sometimes I just try to avoid any of my opponent's potential plans, even if, one, they're not good, or two, they're like fine, but it's also not a bad way for me to continue. And it's something that I really have to work on. That's a weakness. Here, something like king to f1 is fine, and if they do get h4, no big deal. You just continue with something like rook d3. They probably should play rook to d8 to try to avoid any double ups and any issues there. So like rook d8, we can take, king takes, rook d1 check, king e8 or king c8, and then probably king e8 is a little bit better, just for defensive reasons on the queen side here. But it's just like a normal position. It's pretty equal actually. But yeah, if they play g5, bishop to h2, there's an argument that it's actually not such a great way to continue, because you can imagine something like knight to e4 coming later, where this g5 pawn could be attacked. But I didn't really think about things like that. I was just more worried like, oh no, if they do this, then they get a little bit of space on that side of the board, and then I can't go for f4, f5, and e6 like that typical Berlin plan. And that kind of bothered me because, of course, when you're playing your positions, if you only really like know one or two certain plans, then sometimes it gives you like that, I wouldn't say deer in headlights moment, but like it gives you that moment where like it's a tunnel vision thing. That's the word I'm looking for, tunnel vision, where you think that's, yeah, of course, the only way to continue. So you do everything you can to make that plan work, and then when your opponent does everything they can to avoid it, maybe you have something else, but you don't do it because you were so worried about losing the opportunity to play for that one first thing, which is just not a good mindset to have. So yeah, I played g3, and things are okay here, but my opponent had a pretty strong move that I just wasn't worried about at the time because I thought it was okay, and that's bishop takes g5. But it turns out bishop takes g5 is a very decent idea. I thought there's less risk here for me because it's opposite color bishops and still with knights on the board too. Like, I don't like, obviously there's cases where the opposite color bishops become a problem, but I wasn't so upset here. Turns out I should be a little bit worried after rook g6, bishop f4. Knight to e7 is, although maybe not the strongest move, there's an argument just for something a little bit slower like b6. Knight e7 has a pretty serious idea behind it, which is, first off, something like knight to d5 could come, which is a very decent move, which aims essentially just to make sure everything stays equal. But also, it may end up, there may be a scenario where they put their knight on g6 here. And when they put their knight on g6, they're always threatening knight f4. And also they're attacking the e5 pawn. And it's not really so comfortable to deal with that because this all comes with tempo now. Because I played g3, now h3 is hanging. King h2 is going to be best, where after bishop to f5, another tempo. I would have to defend it. And then they get rook e6, and this is where knight g6 comes. And this is, of course, a problem. If I play rook e1, they go knight to g6 here. For example, they could also maybe throw in like rook d8 first. But it doesn't seem like black's doing so bad. At some point, they might be able to take on f4 and maybe even try to say that they're the ones with an advantage here. And I don't really think that's such an incorrect thing to think here. Instead, I played a much worse move, which was h4. And the reason why h4 is worse is because after this move, it weakens g4. Now, to me, g4 didn't feel so relevant immediately, like bishop g4, just like rook d2. I didn't really feel so bad about this. Like, it's unclear what the bishop would be doing here, but it's actually not for the bishop, it's for the rook. And if we continue down the same variation, bishop to f5, which was played in the game, rook to d2, rook to e6, rook to e1 now. Now there's knight g6, and there's a little bit of a problem. Now we can see a future where they take on f4, go rook g6 check, and rook to g4, and win material. Now, because of this, I should probably play h3. Or, sorry, not h3. I should play f3. If I could play h3, I mean, it wouldn't be so good because the pawn would be hanging. But if I could, like, you know, if I could magically at some point play h3, that would be really nice. But f3 is probably the way to go, where after knight takes f4, pawn takes f4, there's no more issues with rook to g6 check, because after king to f2, there's no rook g4 here. But in the game, I played rook e3, and this is the perfect moment for them to actually take. Here, I actually wasn't worried, I believe, because after rook g6, I was thinking, why not rook to g3? What's so bad about this? But it turns out that in this position, you can play rook to d8. And the reason why this is so effective is because after I pretty much am forced to trade, and after I do trade, the c2 pawn hangs. And we're getting to one of those minor piece endgames. For example, if I go knight e2 here, where they take on c2, eventually they'll be ready to take on g3, but they're not really forced into it yet. They're kind of hoping that I take, because that's a little bit nicer than fixing my pawn structure. Like here, after, let's just say, king f1. I mean, king f1 is the worst move. Like, well, yeah, like if you play f takes now, then there's at least bishop d3. Looks like it's just a winning king and pawn ending, and it looks like that is true. But yeah, like they don't really want to fix our pawn structure in any way. So of course, like, what else do I do here though? Like besides kind of eventually just go into the trade, which isn't great. Turns out f takes is a really strong idea, because this pawn's not going anywhere and f5's not going anywhere. And it also just makes sure that I don't have any knight g3 against h5. So yeah, black is just completely winning here. It's just game over. Very unique situation. And of course, if I do anything like king to f1 or king h1 or king h2, rook to g4 at some point will be a very, very disruptive move for me. Yeah, so not great. And I'm pretty much losing there. But my opponent actually didn't go into that. Very lucky for me. They played rook d8, where now I do actually have a chance for like a move to do something, where after rook takes d8, king takes d8, I could play knight to e2. And the reason this gives me an opportunity just for a moment is that after knight takes on f4, at least I can take with the knight. There's no more pawn takes. So, yeah, that would have been nice. But I played knight e4, and this is really bad because it allows the same thing with knight takes on f4, g takes on f4, and rook g6 followed by rook to g4. My opponent did not do this, surprisingly. They played bishop takes on e4, and now things are equal. So this is kind of justifying my point a little bit in the fact that, I mean, sure, these positions are equal a lot of the times. Or even, again, black had an advantage, a very serious one, in fact. And it wasn't even a difficult one, but, I mean, yeah, we're not grandmasters, and that is important to take into account when considering opening choices. So that's why I liked to play this opening at the time. Nowadays, I would actually disagree with the Berlin endgame. I don't like giving my opponent the bishop pair. I think going into those rook e1 lines I showed earlier are better, which I'll show at the end again. But yeah, just going for like the e-file and very symmetrical, I think is a better choice, because you could try to prepare some small ideas there and switch it up here and there. But yeah, after bishop takes e4, of course I have to take back, which I do. And then we see c5. And the idea here is just rook b6, rook a6, stuff like this. So I play rook e3, and rook e3 just doesn't really make much sense. I mean, first off, like, this bishop is just worse placed now. Like, it blocks in my bishop. The idea was if they play something like rook to b3, maybe I could play, or rook to b6, maybe I could play rook b3, or maybe I'm just, like, better defending the third rank, and maybe you can, you know, try to challenge and create threats of my own here. Also, rook d3 check. But it's just not a good idea. The rook on e4 was totally fine. Something like king g2, f3, or even, surprisingly, bishop to e3 is just a much, much better choice. Here, if they take the e5 pawn, rook a4 is actually working here. We're after a6. Now you can take on c5. You have to watch out for take on c5, knight f3 check, winning the rook. So can't do that. But yeah, I played rook e3. And after king d7, I went king g2, rook to a6, a3. At some point, it feels like maybe they can take on f4. But I think the one argument against it is that after something like king e6, we do get king f3 in. And if you're not careful, maybe we can play something king e4 and either f5, or if king e4 provokes something like g6, maybe they actually won't be able to make much use of it, thanks to the rook still being on the board. And in the king and pawn ending here, though, I would likely just be losing, thanks to my damaged pawn structure. So yeah, king e6 was played. I played king f3, just trying to improve my pieces. Now after knight takes, I can consider king takes. And yeah, actually white would be doing pretty okay here. Instead they played knight e7. And arguably rook b6 or rook a4 is actually quite strong. And the idea here is if rook e4, then there's rook d4, which is pretty crazy. And it doesn't show immediately, but this is winning for black, pretty much. After it takes, king to e4, literally what else do you consider here? c5, and yeah, a4, like these are all the engine lines. And now it's starting to finally see, oh, it is losing. But yeah, b6 comes, and eventually you're going to be taking on f4. You can't move it because you lose at, yeah, you lose e5. If the king ever moves away, you lose e5. So a simple line is b3, just trying to make moves that don't lose material right away. You can take on f4 now, and if king takes f4, you are allowing king to d5, and this just wins the game. After even something like king to f5, trying to be a bit aggressive in g6, there's king f6, but you just go king, or sorry, you don't go king move, you play a6. And again, you're just running out of moves. You can try f3 here, b5, takes, g4, c4, takes, and d3 is coming finally. As we can see, white is completely losing. Another variation is if you take with the g-pawn trying to avoid any entry, just the simple g6 works. And it's kind of like a similar situation where a6 is played and white has no moves, whereas black has b5 and maybe even c4 as a sacrifice, but eventually the king has to move away. King f5 comes and everything drops off the board. So pretty like interesting idea, but it's pretty easy to understand why this is winning for black, in my opinion. But getting there from this position might be a little bit trickier. But that rook d4 move is just really, really strong. I played rook b3 after knight to e7. They played b6. And this is kind of what I was hoping for, actually, because I'm okay with this position as well, actually. I was kind of hoping for something like this, king to e4. And then kind of playing this one out as it might be like harder for them to make any sort of like passed pawns here. Like after knight to g6, like c4 could be played. And even if they take, now actually I'm winning because d5 is covered. But yeah, I would be pretty happy with this. Same thing with like a takes. I think a4. Like there's really good chances just to hold this position in these cases. And yeah, after takes, king takes, again, it's actually winning for white, not for black. So that would be really nice. But yeah, b6 is something that I'm very happy to see as well, because it just makes this rook look a little silly. Like you have to eventually get it out with rook a5 or rook to a4 later. But for now, it's a little bit passive. So then I go back to d3. And after rook to d3, we see knight c6. And I played c3 here. Now, I'm not worried about them cashing in too early with knight takes e5. And this is actually kind of the point behind my move. c3 is that after knight takes, there's rook to d7. And yeah, they can play c6, but then I take f7. So I'm winning one of these pawns. It's better to give up c7 and just go king e6 here. And just, hope that they can kind of get out. I think they probably should be fine. Rook to a5 with the idea of rook b5 is a little annoying. So things are turning out fine, but again, I felt like I was under pressure, so any of those positions I would be super happy with. Yeah, they played rook to a4, which I think is a little dubious. It turns out rook to a5 is it just feels like this wins the game, actually. And the idea is, I mean, rook e3 looks very natural, so let's consider it. The idea here is rook b5. Now rook to e2 to defend b2. And now c4. And they're just winning one of these pawns at some point. And there's not a way for me to avoid it. So this is a problem, obviously. But with rook a4, yeah, it would take them a little bit more time to play something like rook a5, c4, and then rook b5. So it's not really the right approach to the position. And again, I'm not really worried as much about knight takes e5 here. So yeah, whatever. But I go rook e3. And they go knight to a5. And here I go rook to e2. Turns out g4 is actually a decent move here, but we actually see something like that later. I go rook e2, and they go knight b3, and I go rook e4 here. Now, they should actually accept the trade. I think this is a very good option for them. They go back to a5. Moves like knight c4 could come very, very quickly, and looks a little problematic. I saw this variation. I thought maybe I'm okay after bishop to c1, knight c4, and something like f4. But also my pieces are a little passive. Like something like this could be played, but if I ever play b3, I pretty much have to play b4 after, giving up some crucial squares. And yeah, what else do I really go into here? It's kind of difficult to see. And you can imagine eventually when this knight moves around and changes locations, for example, the knight getting to f5, as you can see, it's very simple to imagine this knight getting to f5. It's literally just that move, that move, that move, that move. And it's not like I could realistically either prevent it or do something decent against it. I mean, if I play something like b4, I'm just encouraging them to open this side of the board with a5 with a winning advantage for black. So yeah, them taking on e4 is very good, but we're not grandmasters, so c4 was played. And now, all of a sudden, it goes from an equal game, and then I was worse in the game, to all of a sudden, I am better. And I tried to take full effect of that. c4, obvious idea, trying to go for knight c5, so I prevent that with bishop to e3. We see knight a5, and now I go g4, and a very obvious move. The whole idea is you're trying to attack the g7 pawn. They take it, because otherwise I would take on h5 and then go rook g4 anyways. So they take, I take back, they go g6, and here is where I start to go a little wrong. Now, king e4 is a decent move. Rook f4 is very strong, where after knight c6, there's rook f6 check. They have to go back to defend, or they can go up to defend as well. But then there's moves like e6, which is very strong here, just going for the pawn like this. And after f takes, don't take on g6 immediately. King g4 and then rook g6, or not rook g6 even still, knight e5, but king g5, king g6. This h pawn starts to run down the board very, very fast. But instead, yeah, I play king e4, which is kind of an understandable move. I think the problem is it does sometimes run into like things like f5, but also there's another idea that it runs into in just a moment, which is very unfortunate, which is that after knight c6, I mean, I was looking at f4 and I was going to play it, but I miscalculated here. And I thought that I could play a different move first that was decent. Turns out it doesn't. I played h5. Now, the reason why I thought this worked was because, well, if they take the pawn, I go rook g5, and then I go f4 anyways, and then eventually I just take the pawn. And then I can go even f5 check. Like, you can imagine h4, f4, even here, rook f5 is very strong, just going for rook f6. But you can imagine this position is very difficult to deal with. And kind of felt like a little bit of a forced move, because after knight takes e5, looks like I have h6. But I don't. And yeah, it was deep into the game. It was late at night. And I just completely miscalculated this. First off, f5 check actually works. But knight takes on g4. And the problem here is that after h7, which I thought worked, there's knight f6 check. Very, very sad way to end the game. So after knight takes on e5, very sad blunder where finally it felt like I was actually getting somewhere and kind of outplaying a little bit. Like their rook is on a4. It looks really stupid. Their knight is actually decently placed. But yeah, after f4, feels like things are going okay. Yeah, I just completely threw the game. And this was against someone much lower rated at the time. So that definitely affected the following games as well, which is very, very important for kind of like what happens in this tournament and my general feelings towards chess at the time. So yeah, but after f4, let's kind of get into things. F4 here in knight e7, you can actually play h5. And here you have to be a little careful after takes. Don't play rook h4. This is bad because of knight f5. If you take, then knight g3 check. So you have to like go back, and that's really sad. You have to play something like bishop f2, and then you can maybe take. But then you're giving black enough time to go like rook a5 or rook d5 or something. Rook b5 or rook d5. Instead, with rook g5, you prevent this move altogether. Knight g6 does not work because you just win the knight. But yeah, knight f5, of course you take it. So they have to do something else here. Apparently f5 check is a move to consider. But after takes, and then rook h5, this is just winning for white. But yeah, they actually shouldn't take, surprisingly. Like rook a5 is the only move to work in this position, which is insane to me, that you just allow h6 like that. But h6 does not work because of rook d5, h7, rook d8. And yeah, the game would go on. And Hopefully, like when you play h5, if they play rook a5, you see the idea at that point. But it's up to them first off to find this. And if they don't, then obviously this just kind of wins the game immediately. And otherwise, like, yeah, at this point, maybe I could just consider trading and still have honestly, a very decent game here. Like, I could go bishop f2, bishop h4, and threaten to take, things like that. So, yeah, a very just decent position to play. And yeah, I didn't get to play anything like that because I, unfortunately, just blundered here with h5. So, very unfortunate. And also, I did mention before that nowadays I think it's more of my flavor to play into rook e1 positions after takes, not d4. Because rook e1, just this stuff in general, it feels like if you're trying to go for something here, like it feels like they're, you know, you can still like make a little bit of a mess here after castles and d4. Like there's a few options that black does have at their disposal, but there's a few options that white has at their disposal that, you know, keep the queens on, keep things a little bit more complicated. Again, since I'm not a grandmaster and generally not playing against grandmasters except for like 2 rounds ago, these positions are absolutely playable. So yeah, just as a quick heads up, things are going to be a little crazy going into the next couple of rounds. It was actually quite difficult for me to just look at these games, but I think it's very important for my chess growth. The reason why it's kind of difficult to look at these games, at least for me, is because I was just getting burned out. I was training so hard around these times, and I was gaining a ton of rating. I mean, I was 2150, but I had so many tournaments, felt like it was like 4 or 5 at this point, where I was close to a national master norm in like the last round, and then like again, it just like it put a chip on my shoulder because I had one time I got paired against someone so low rated that even if I won, I wouldn't get the norm, even though if I played anyone else and even like drew, I would have. There was another one where, I mean, Grandmaster in the final round, can't really complain about that for the last tournament. Someone didn't show up to one of the games one time, so it's immediately like I can't get a norm because these are only 5-round events, and National Master norm, you need 5 games minimum. So just like so much going wrong, and I mean, like, if I'm getting close to the results, that feels good at first, but then when it keeps happening, you feel like there's something wrong with you. You're doing something wrong. You're never going to get it because everything is working against you here. And it really messes you up, honestly, to keep having those things happen over and over and over and over again. So, yeah, this tournament a little bit was the reason why I took like a 2-year break. It was like 1 or 2 years, something like that, from tournament play, where I finally recently got back. But it was like, it wasn't just this tournament. It was like, this was the culmination of seeing Burnout in action. Because I really do feel like moves like this, like h5 just feels like, I feel like h5, I could say like, I'm probably burned out from playing so much chess or like doing so much training if I play a move like this. Because it's just such a silly move to not play f4, isn't it? Like, in my opinion, it was. But yeah, excuses. That's going to cover it for this game. I'll see you guys in the next one, where things get worse, and then the following one where things get worse. Then things get a little bit better, and then I stop playing for a little bit. But yeah, I don't know how to end this one because that's like kind of a lot to mention. But yeah, all right, let's get into the next game next time. Or yeah, I'll see you next time. That's the best way to end it. All right, bye-bye.